Some places carry memories, others carry secrets, and then there are places that refuse to let either one die. On the northern coast of Oregon, where towering pine trees sway against relentless ocean winds and waves have spent centuries carving away unforgiving cliffs, there stands a place people speak about with nothing but admiration. It's called Harbor Point Rehabilitation Center. To the outside world, Harbor Point is a place of healing. Families arrive carrying fear and leave carrying hope. Patients who believed they'd never walk again take their first uncertain steps through its hallways. Broken lives are rebuilt there every single day. At least, that's what everyone believed. The truth was hidden beneath polished floors, smiling faces, and years of carefully protected secrets. And before anyone realized it, those secrets were about to surface. It all began on a night when the ocean seemed determined to swallow the coastline whole. Rain hammered the cliffs with relentless force. Lightning tore across the sky, turning the Black Sea silver for only a heartbeat before darkness reclaimed it. Thunder rolled across the water like an angry warning, shaking windows throughout the quiet town. An ambulance raced through the storm. Its siren pierced the night as red and blue lights reflected across the soaked highway. Inside, paramedics fought desperately to keep a young accident victim alive, while every passing second slipped away. When the ambulance finally reached Harbor Point, the rear doors burst open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Doctors and nurses rushed forward. Leading them was Dr. Maya Bennett. At 42 years old, Maya had earned a reputation few physicians ever achieve. She wasn't the loudest doctor. She wasn't the most intimidating. She didn't panic, and she never wasted words. She simply made the right decisions when everyone else was running out of time. Within seconds, she assessed the patient's injuries. Her instructions came calmly, clear, precise, confident. The trauma team responded almost instinctively. Machines beeped. Medical equipment moved into place. Outside, another flash of lightning lit the emergency entrance. For a brief moment, the lights flickered. No one stopped. Neither did Maya. She remained completely focused. Minutes later, the patient's heartbeat stabilized. The room fell quiet. A nurse released the breath she'd been holding. Another smiled with relief. Someone whispered, "Only Dr. Bennett could have pulled that off." Maya simply removed her gloves, nodded once, and walked toward her next patient. Saving lives wasn't something she celebrated. To her, it was simply another responsibility. By morning, the storm had disappeared as though it had never happened. Sunlight stretched across the Pacific Ocean, transforming the same violent coastline into something breathtaking. Fishing boats drifted peacefully across calm water. Seagulls circled overhead. The lighthouse overlooking the cliffs stood proudly against a bright blue sky. Nothing about that beautiful morning suggested that something far darker had already begun. After finishing her shift, Maya drove home along the winding coastal highway. Waiting inside was the man she planned to marry, Ethan Brooks. If Maya represented quiet confidence, Ethan represented effortless charm. People trusted him almost immediately. He remembered birthdays, volunteered at local charities, spent time talking with patients long after his workday ended. He had a smile that made people feel seen. As owner of Harbor Point Rehabilitation Center, Ethan had become one of the town's most respected businessmen. He greeted Maya with a fresh cup of coffee already waiting on the kitchen counter. "Long night?" he asked. Maya smiled. "You have no idea." He laughed softly. "Then breakfast is mandatory." The two of them sat near the large windows overlooking the ocean. Steam rose from their coffee cups while morning sunlight filled the room. They talked about wedding plans, vacation ideas, the future expansion of Harbor Point. Everything felt ordinary, comfortable, safe. It was the kind of morning people spend years hoping to have. Neither of them realized it would be one of the last truly peaceful mornings they would ever share. Later that day, Harbor Point came alive with its usual rhythm. Patients arrived for therapy sessions. Families embraced loved ones. Doctors hurried through hallways carrying charts. Therapists encouraged patients to take one more step, then another. Maya moved from room to room, greeting everyone by name. One elderly man proudly showed her he could finally walk without assistance. A young girl recovering from a head injury handed Maya a colorful drawing. "It's you," she said with a shy smile. Maya laughed. "I think you made me look much nicer than I actually do." The little girl giggled. Moments like those reminded Maya why she had chosen medicine. Across the lobby, Ethan welcomed visitors with the same warmth that made everyone admire him. Standing nearby was his younger sister, Lena Brooks. Lena coordinated patient schedules and helped families navigate the difficult road to recovery. She worked quickly, smiled often, and somehow managed to make even the busiest days feel organized. Together, Maya, Ethan, and Lena looked like the perfect team. A brilliant doctor, a respected director, an efficient administrator. Harbor Point couldn't have asked for better leaders. Or so everyone believed, because perfection has an interesting way of hiding its cracks. At first, the signs were so small, they barely seemed worth noticing. Every Thursday afternoon, Ethan disappeared. Not for long, usually about 90 minutes. Whenever Maya asked where he had gone, his answers sounded completely reasonable. A supplier meeting, property paperwork, a contractor, a financial consultation. Running a rehabilitation center required constant attention. Nothing about his explanations seemed suspicious. Until one Thursday afternoon, Maya happened to be reviewing patient records in her second-floor office when she glanced through the window. She watched Ethan leave the building, but instead of walking through the main entrance like he always did, he quietly exited through a rarely used service door at the back of the facility. He looked around briefly, not nervously, almost automatically, as though checking whether anyone happened to be nearby. Then he climbed into his SUV and drove away. Maya frowned. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even suspicion. It was simply a feeling she couldn't quite explain. She looked at the clock. Thursday, the exact same time as every other week. She told herself there was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. There usually was. Still, that small moment stayed with her far longer than it should have. She returned to her paperwork, answered emails, reviewed patient reports, held afternoon consultations. Yet every now and then, her mind wandered back to the empty parking space where Ethan's SUV had been only minutes earlier. Sometimes our instincts don't scream. They whisper, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to notice. Maya had no idea that one simple observation would become the first loose thread in a mystery capable of destroying everything she believed about the people closest to her. Because very soon, she wouldn't simply wonder where Ethan disappeared every Thursday. She would begin asking a far more dangerous question. What exactly was Harbor Point hiding? If this story has you questioning what really goes on behind closed doors, you're not alone. Take a second to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you're enjoying the mystery, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next chapter, Maya discovers a clue that someone has been desperately trying to keep buried for years. And once she uncovers it, there's no turning back. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Questions have a strange way of changing people. The moment a single unanswered question enters your mind, everything familiar begins to look different. The same hallway, the same faces, the same conversations. Nothing changes. Yet somehow, everything does. For Maya, that feeling refused to disappear. She didn't become suspicious overnight. She simply became observant. Over the next few days, life at Harbor Point continued exactly as it always had. Patients attended therapy. Doctors moved from room to room. Families filled the waiting areas with quiet hope. Ethan smiled through meetings, shook hands with donors, and spoke confidently about the future of the rehabilitation center. If anyone had watched him, they would have seen the same man everyone admired. The same calm leader, the same devoted fiancé, the same respected businessman. But Maya had started noticing the little things. And little things have a way of becoming very important. One evening, after most of the staff had gone home, Maya stayed behind to finish reviewing neurological recordings from one of her patients. It wasn't unusual. She often worked late. The hospital had settled into that familiar nighttime silence. Distant footsteps echoed through empty corridors. Cleaning crews quietly pushed carts from one hallway to another. Outside, the ocean wind rattled the large windows. Maya adjusted her headphones and replayed a recording from earlier that afternoon. The patient's therapy session had already ended. The microphone should have been silent. Instead, she heard voices, very faint, almost impossible to understand. She increased the volume. A man's voice drifted through the static. She froze. She knew that voice. It was Ethan. Her heart skipped. That couldn't be right. According to the day's schedule, Ethan had been attending a planning meeting across town. So why was his voice inside the rehabilitation center? She replayed the recording again and again. The conversation itself wasn't clear enough to understand, but there was no mistaking the speaker. It was Ethan. Curiosity replaced confusion. She opened the hospital's security system. Finding the hallway footage would take less than a minute. The cameras covered nearly every corridor. If Ethan had been there, the cameras would prove it. She searched for the exact time shown on the recording. The screen loaded. Then, an error appeared. Footage unavailable. Maya frowned. She checked another camera. Nothing. Another. Still nothing. The entire section of surveillance footage had vanished. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Deleted. Someone had removed it deliberately. Only 2 people inside Harbor Point possessed administrator privileges capable of deleting security recordings. Ethan and Lena. Maya leaned back in her chair. For several long seconds, she simply stared at the monitor. There was still a perfectly innocent explanation. There had to be. System maintenance. Software failure. Human error. She wanted to believe any of those explanations. Instead, she quietly inserted a flash drive in her laptop. Without telling anyone, she began making copies of every security log she could access, just in case. The following afternoon, Maya found herself watching people more carefully than usual. Not spying, simply paying attention. She noticed Ethan speaking with a visiting contractor. He smiled, laughed. Everything seemed perfectly natural. Lena passed through the lobby carrying patient files. She looked relaxed, professional. Nothing about either of them suggested they were hiding anything. And yet, the deleted footage remained impossible to explain. By the end of the week, Maya realized she needed another opinion. Someone with experience. Someone she trusted. Someone who knew how to look beyond appearances. That person was Nolan Pierce. Years earlier, Nolan had built a reputation as one of Oregon's most respected homicide detectives. Now retired, he worked quietly as an insurance investigator. He had spent decades uncovering fraud, solving impossible cases, and noticing details everyone else overlooked. If something didn't make sense, Nolan would see it. The following morning, they met at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Fishing boats rocked gently against wooden docks while gulls circled overhead. It was peaceful, the kind of place where difficult conversations somehow felt easier. Nolan arrived carrying a paper coffee cup and wearing the same weathered brown jacket he'd owned for years. He greeted Maya with a warm smile. "It's been too long." She smiled back. "It has." They exchanged a few minutes of ordinary conversation before Maya placed a small folder on the table. Inside were copies of security logs. Nothing more. Nolan looked at the papers. Then at Maya. "You don't usually ask for favors." "I know. So what's worrying you?" Maya hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." She explained everything. The missing recordings. The strange audio. The deleted files. Ethan's unexplained movements. When she finished, Nolan remained silent.
Nolan,
He wasn't judging.
something isn't
He was
right.
thinking.
Security footage keeps
Finally,
disappearing.
he nodded
Everything
once.
was summary shouldn't have
Let's
been.
start with the
I must
facts.
stop
A
guessing.
day later,
Start
Nolan
following
visited
theories.
Harbor Point under the pretense of reviewing security procedures for an insurance assessment. No one questioned him. He had performed similar inspections dozens of times before. Inside the security office, rows of surveillance monitors displayed nearly every hallway inside the rehabilitation center. Nolan quietly examined weeks of archived activity logs. His eyes moved carefully across the data. Then, he stopped. "Interesting." Maya looked over his shoulder. "What is it?" Nolan pointed toward the screen. "These deleted recordings." He scrolled farther back. "They're not random." Maya leaned closer. "What do you mean?" They all happened near the same location. He enlarged a floor map of Harbor Point. One room appeared over and over again. Room 12. Maya frowned. That's impossible. Nolan looked at her. Why? Room 12 hasn't been used in years. According to hospital records, it had been permanently closed after a plumbing failure nearly 6 years earlier. No patients, no staff, nothing. Yet every deleted recording somehow traced back to that hallway. Nolan folded his arms. If nobody uses it, he looked directly at Maya. Why keep deleting footage around it? The question lingered between them. Neither had an answer. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Maya stood alone in the silent hallway leading toward room 12. The corridor felt strangely forgotten. The paint looked older, the lights dimmer. Dust collected along the baseboards. At the end of the hallway, a faded wooden door waited quietly beneath a small brass number. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Maya slowly reached for the handle. She hesitated, then turned it. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was empty. Almost. At first glance, room 12 looked exactly like what the hospital records claimed it was. Abandoned. A thin layer of dust covered the floor near the windows. The curtains hung motionless, untouched for what appeared to be years. An old hospital bed sat neatly against one wall, its mattress stripped bare. A bedside cabinet stood in the corner. Empty. The air smelled faintly of aged wood and disinfectant. Everything about the room suggested no one had entered it in a very long time. And yet, something didn't feel right. Maya couldn't explain it. Years of working in hospitals had taught her to trust evidence. But she'd also learned to trust instinct. Her eyes slowly moved across the room. Nothing. She checked inside the cabinet. Empty. She opened the closet. Only a few old hangers swayed gently as the door moved. Still nothing. She was about to leave when something caught her attention. One of the wooden floorboards near the far wall didn't quite match the others. It wasn't obvious, just different enough to make her stop. She crouched beside it, ran her fingers across the wood. It shifted ever so slightly beneath her hand. Someone had lifted it before. Carefully. Recently. Maya looked around one last time. The hallway outside remained silent. Slowly, she slid the floorboard aside. Beneath, it was a narrow compartment, no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, rested an old cassette recorder. Dust covered the plastic casing, but the buttons looked surprisingly clean. Someone had used it. Not years ago. Recently. Her pulse quickened. Who would hide something like this beneath the floor? And why? She carefully picked it up. There was already a cassette inside. No label. No markings. Just a blank strip of faded plastic. Maya hesitated, then pressed play. For several seconds, there was nothing. Only the faint hiss of aging magnetic tape. Then, a woman's voice emerged. Soft, weak, almost trembling. If you're hearing this. A long silence followed. They already know you came. Maya held her breath. The voice continued. You can't trust what you see. Static interrupted the recording. The sound crackled violently before settling again. They're watching. More static. They always... The tape suddenly stopped. Silence. Complete silence. Maya stared at the recorder. She replayed it. The same words. The same interruption. Nothing more. Who was she? Who was they? And how long had this recording been hidden beneath the floor? Questions flooded her mind faster than answers ever could. She slipped the recorder into her bag and quietly left room 12. The hallway outside remained empty. No footsteps, no voices, just the distant hum of the building settling for the night. For the first time since this strange feeling had begun, Maya wasn't just curious. She was genuinely unsettled. The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The cassette recorder remained exactly where she'd left it, locked safely inside the bottom drawer of her office desk. Or so she thought. She unlocked the drawer. It was empty. Maya blinked, then looked again. The recorder was gone. Nothing else had been touched. Patient files remained neatly stacked. Her laptop sat exactly where she'd left it. Even a loose paper clip hadn't moved. Only the cassette recorder had disappeared. Someone had entered her office, not to steal valuables, not to search documents, only to recover the tape. A chill slowly ran through her. Someone knew she'd found it, and that meant someone was watching her. She immediately checked the office security logs. Nothing. No entry. No camera footy. The surveillance system showed an uninterrupted empty hallway throughout the night. Impossible. Unless the footage had been altered again. Maya leaned back in her chair. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Someone inside Harbor Point possessed complete control over the security system. Someone careful. Someone experienced. Someone who knew exactly how to erase their tracks. 3 days passed. Maya told no one. Not Ethan. Not Lena. Not even Nolan. She needed time to think. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, something unexpected arrived. A plain brown envelope. No return address. No posti. Someone had slipped it beneath her office door. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a group of patients standing outside Harbor Point nearly 15 years earlier. Nothing unusual, until Maya looked closer. Near the back of the crowd stood a figure. Out of focus. Almost hidden. Watching everyone. The face couldn't be identified. The image was too blurred. She turned the photograph over. Nothing. No note. No signature. Only the picture. The following day, another envelope appeared. Another photograph. Different patients. Different year. The same blurred figure. Always standing in the background. Always watching. By the end of the week, there were 4 photographs. Different decades. Different people. The same mysterious silhouette. It couldn't be coincidence. Someone wanted Maya to notice that figure. The question was, why? Unable to investigate alone any longer, Maya reached out to someone whose career had been built on uncovering hidden truths. Investigative journalist Caleb Morris. Caleb had spent years exposing corporate fraud, government corruption, and medical scandals. He didn't chase rumors. He followed evidence. They met inside the town's historic public library. Rows of towering bookshelves surrounded them, while afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows. Caleb listened without interrupting. He examined each photograph carefully. Then he looked up. These weren't sent to scare you. Maya frowned. You think they're clues? Edo. What makes you so sure? Caleb placed the photographs side by side. Because whoever sent them wanted you to compare them. Maya leaned closer. Only then did she notice it. The blurred figure wasn't the only thing that appeared in every photograph. In the background, barely visible, stood the same stone building, Room 12's wing. Every photograph had been taken before that section of Harbor Point was supposedly closed. Caleb looked toward Maya. I think someone has been trying to tell this story for a very long time. Maya slowly nodded. And maybe they finally found someone willing to listen. Outside the library, dark clouds quietly gathered over the Pacific once again. A storm was coming, but neither of them realized the weather would soon become the least of their worries. Because somewhere inside Harbor Point, someone had already noticed that Maya Bennett was getting closer to the truth. And whoever had spent years protecting those secrets wasn't about to let them be uncovered without a fight.